In operating rooms across the country, anesthesia is undergoing a transformation, and the people leading that change are no longer just anesthesiologists.
Anesthesia is changing, and so are its leaders.
The future is interprofessional. It's not one or the other, but the best among the crowds.
Thinking about jumping into a leadership role, I wholeheartedly support that. You just have to be flexible.
But behind every leadership story is pressure.
We are seeing exponential increases almost across the board. Hey, our subsidy needs to double. Hey, it needs to go up by 2.5 times.
Financial models are cracking, and legacy systems don't hold up like they used to.
But if you were thinking about it purely through a financial lens, you would not be insourcing your anesthesia program.
And for new leaders, there's no shortcut.
Get 10 years experience by having 10 years experience. ChatGPT will not save you.
So what can leaders do to keep a team
It
together?
is all about the culture. It's all about the culture. And everything else, I can't even say that it's secondary. It's way down the line.
You check your politics at the door. We're going to do this together.
This isn't about staffing or operations. It's about redefining leadership in the face of a system under strain.
Welcome to Anesthesia Deconstructed.
Thank you for this special episode of Anesthesia Deconstructed. Anesthesia is changing, and so are its leaders. As more and more CRNAs are stepping into roles, as everyone on this call currently is, that they previously did not occupy. And anesthesiologists are also looking for strong clinical leaders, strong clinical partners. We really see across the industry that new models of shared leadership are emerging. That's why we wanted to have this conversation. So whether you're a CRNA who's wanting to step into leadership positions at a local or regional or national level, or you're an anesthesiologist who's looking for reliable partners to run your service line or run your business, or your healthcare administrator who really wants a valuable department, that's the type of conversation that we want to have here today. So we're going to flip over into the introductions. So Andrew Woodmansey is a co-host of today's episode. Andrew, do you mind rolling through some of the introductions of our guests today?
Yeah, of course. I think it's better if everyone just kind of introduces themselves.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Randy's been around these things a long time. You can introduce yourself.
Executive Vice President of Clinical Strategy at North Star Anesthesia. I've been in this role for, about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was in a very different job, which is the CEO of the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, and did that for 4 years. And then if we go way back, not way back, but I was in hospital leadership for a period of time and military leadership as well.
Hey, Tom, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Tom Palaria. I am currently the program director for the Rutgers graduate program in nurse anesthesiology. And I am also the chief CRNA, one of the chief CRNAs for the Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas Health System, which is the largest health system in the state of New Jersey. My background, I've been a CRNA. This is my 25th year. There's going to be a huge silver celebration, apparently, from my current nurse anesthesia residents. But I started the Rutgers program back in 2004. Natural progression, I became a chief CRNA in 2010, and I've been with some anesthesia management companies, private practice. I've pretty much done it all clinically and academically, leading up to being on this panel with all of you today. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tom. Adam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my pleasure. Adam Boyd. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Performance for Sound Anesthesia Service Line. Been here about a year and a half, and don't let the clinical performance fool you. Very little of what I do is actually clinical quality, lots of business development, operations, special projects, and anything and everything else they need me to do. Prior to this, I was director of the physician resource team, which is a team of internal consultants for HCA Healthcare that help all their hospitals and ASCs nationwide negotiate their hospital-based service line contracts.
Thanks, Adam. John?
Yes, good evening. John Sykes, co-founder and CEO of BPI Anesthesia, headquartered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. and it was CRNA now for 24 years, and 23 of them have been with DPI. So we are a small market anesthesia group in the Southeast with some exponential growth here in the last 5 years, and looking to continue that.
And Joe, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to those who may not be familiar with you?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. My name's Joe Rodriguez, and I am the Chief Development Officer at Guide Anesthesia, which is formerly Arizona Anesthesia Solutions, which is a group. We're one of the small groups on call, so we're about 200 providers. So we're probably, I don't know, 1/10 of the size of most of the organizations on the call. But yeah, we're holding it together here in Phoenix, Arizona, and a few other places as well.
Sounds good. So first up, we have Tom Polaria sharing insights into leadership within both large hospital systems as well as on the educational side. So Tom, you want to kick us off with some of your experiences?
Yeah.
And how others could get into leadership as well. Sorry.
Sure, Andrew. No, that was a lot. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I think I would like to just focus on the insights, my latest insights, which is I'm now an employee of a large health system. First time for me. I think there's a lot of advantages to what I'm currently experiencing right now. Certainly, coming off of my prior employment models. So I guess just for a little bit of background, I've done the institutional model, working for the state at a state facility. And then I kind of transitioned into a smaller private group, got that experience as a leader. That's when I first became a chief CRNA for a group that never employed CRNAs. So that was quite a journey. I had to learn on the fly without a lot of guidance. And I have a lot of people to thank for that, connections that I made through the ANA through going to regular meetings. And then I kind of segged into working for a large practice management company where you and I met, Andrew, during that time when all the smaller groups were being kind of, bought up by private equity. That was a really great experience for me. And as far as leadership, it really gave me the foundation to continue to expand my role as a leader within the CRNA community. I can't even tell you how much I learned I worked for 2 large anesthesia management companies, and both of those companies, they were tough experiences, but they were valuable. And I mean, as far as becoming a leader and being a leader, for people who are listening out there who are potentially thinking about jumping into a leadership role, I wholeheartedly support that. You just have to be able to be flexible and just know that there's so much to learn. You're never going to learn it all. I'm still learning new things. And then from there, we went through COVID, a lot of bad times there. And I would say that was one of my best moments of being a leader, getting people through that, starting to deal with CRNAs from across the country who came to my neck of the woods. As everyone knows, that, everything was New York and New Jersey at that point, initially in the early months of 2020. And I gained so much leadership experience there that I'm still using today. And then that brings me to now working for a health system. And with this role that I'm in, I'm a chief over 2 different campuses of a large health system. I have a lot of responsibilities everywhere, anything from day-to-day management to, of course, scheduling and vacation and PTO and quality and dealing with the day-to-day issues of the next generation of anesthesia providers who have a very large basket full of expectations that are always challenging to manage. But I would say in my role now and as an employee, I'd like to think there's like 5 things. I always try to find 5 things in any role that I have. And now working for a large health system, I think that as a brand new service line, because anesthesia was not covered by this health system before, it was management company before. I think that we've really taken advantage of a huge opportunity of being kind of the new kids on the block within this large organization, forging new partnerships with people who you already clinically knew. They already know your worth, and now they feel like you're kind of on their team now. And I mean, as an example, now we're all involved, all the chief CRNAs, in choosing anesthesia machines for the entire system, which is a huge responsibility. It's a huge expense, and we're meeting on a regular basis to make sure that we all kind of get what we want while also being fiscally responsible. The next big point is we have this now built-in network of leaders, and I had that with the anesthesia management companies as well, but it's a little bit more intimate now. We all know each other. We sometimes share staff, so we're able to kind of bounce things off each other, and it's a very collegial environment with both the CRNAs and the anesthesiologists.
Hey, Tom, just for clarity, are you the chief CRNA of chief CRNAs? Because you've mentioned multiple chiefs multiple times.
Yeah, no, I'm a chief over 2 sites. I'm one of like 7 chief CRNAs.
Okay.
And we
really noted.
Yeah, we report up to like a senior vice president of the service line.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I only ask because is this new for the system as well? Is this because you said this is brand new?
It's still new for me. It's let's see, it's 25 now. So we hit 2 years in August of last year. So it'll be 3 this coming.
Okay, and this is a new employed system, right? Because that's a emerging trend.
It absolutely is, and it started in the summer of 22 with a few of the campuses converting to a service line kind of arrangement, and then since then, yeah, the anesthesia service line, and then was the new creation, and since then, whenever a contract expires, then that next place just gets added into the service line. So I'm the chief of the last one, which was last October. So it's been about
If you could
process.
Because I want to distill some of your experience for hospital administrators that are listening who may not be familiar with this leadership model, right? If you could kind of distill into one idea, this chief CRNAs that they are not used to working with, what's the one thing that they should know about integrating CRNAs into the leadership that would be useful for them if they are, whether it's internal or external, but in this example, internalizing their service? What's the one thing they should know about CRNA leadership that they do not know currently?
Well, from my perspective, what the C-suite has really embraced since this transition to being employed by the system is that we are, one of 2 leaders for the anesthesia department. Our expertise is dealing with the CRNA provider, even though it's an anesthesia provider, very different population from the anesthesiologist provider. Mm-hmm. The CRNA can really offer, and does offer, a lot of specific knowledge and guidance when dealing with what usually works out to be more than 50% of their anesthesia workforce in each individual campus or medical center.
Tom, as a follow-up, how has your relationship changed from your prior roles when it comes to running the OR schedule and input from the anesthesia team? I know, one of the pain points for anesthesia all across the country is being asked to cover inefficient rooms. Is there a bit of an adjustment as in the employed model to people being more flexible to moving cases to the afternoon? And is there more communication between both parties from your experience?
I will say that I think the communication has gotten better, and really only because the surgeons, nursing, perioperative leadership, even though they're still dealing, in my situation, with the same people, we are now, quote unquote, on their team. We don't work for a separate company. We all work for one organization with the same goals, which is efficiency, taking care of patients. So I would say the communication has gotten better. As far as coverage, Andrew, it's still the same struggles. I like to think that we have even more of a voice now, again, because we all are now on the same team, quote unquote, where we're all reporting up to the same higher, beyond C-suite structure. I can tell you,
Do you feel it's,
as many pain points as there were before.
Tom, do you feel it, since you are an employee of the system now and you're contrasting that from a third party group, do you feel it is more efficient? Do you feel that the system the institution you're part of is efficient?
I think there are some efficiencies that still need some work. Again, coming from a large management company that had been doing it for years, very fine-tuned processes, infrastructure. We're still building that. And that's what our expertise, the anesthesia expertise, is really being utilized for and leveraged for. But I mean, I can't compare 2.5 years to companies that have been in business for, decades, for a few examples. So, but we're getting there. But as far as being streamlined, yes, because I'm seeing that those side meetings that had to take place, they don't have to. Everything is just directly from the local leadership all the way up. And it seems like things move a little bit faster.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just as a contrast, and maybe it's good for a point of reference, I think internal, external, that's certainly a hot topic now. Whether it's internal, external, I think it's always maybe the most important thing is competence rather than internal, external, because there's probably good examples of both. Randy, you've been an internal hospital leader, right? You've been a trade association leader. Now you're on at, I think, a respected third party group with North Star Anesthesia. Could you just debrief us on your role with how you're interacting with hospital leadership currently, or unless you're primarily on the CRNA side, but I imagine you're brought into some of the hospital leadership as well. I can see you nodding there. And then can you just speak to how you overcome some of those integration issues?
I think our core operating thesis, which is, I think, the reason why we do well, is that the insource versus outsource option, there are pluses and minuses for both. We tend to think that we're able to do about everything else better than an in-source model. If you look at our ability to, from an efficiency perspective, our ability to recruit, retain clinical talent is probably differentiated because we've got a massive infrastructure and time tested strategies to make that happen. Obviously, there's also very nitty gritty. You get into our ability to negotiate rates is probably different than most hospitals or health systems, either from a leverage perspective or an expertise perspective. So I think all of those things are, when I think about as a hospital or health system is making that decision, they should weigh the pluses and minuses. From a financial perspective, and that's not the only perspective, to be clear, that you should think about. You should think about this decision holistically. But if you were thinking about it purely through a financial lens, you would not be insourcing your anesthesia program. But if you are willing to give up some of the finances in order to have complete control of your anesthesia programs, then go for it. You've made a decision. It's a strategic decision that you think you're going to be able to leave money on the table, but run things more efficiently. Our experience has been that it's really difficult to do that. So as we think about how we partner with our current clients and potential future clients, we take a very consultative approach, which is, we're going to be very transparent. And if we're not the cheapest option, you're going to find out about that pretty quickly. And we are pretty comfortable in how we differentiate ourselves from the less expensive option, whether that's an in-source or an alternative bid or bids. So we are willing to give up deals in order to make sure we have the right partnership. So I think as we take a consultative approach, the way that we think about this stuff is, look, and this is how I negotiate with everybody, including my kids, which is, you've got 3 options. Here are your 3 options. Pick one. And we can make all 3 of these work. We recommend option A. Option A, I think, is the best option for you. But what we've seen sometimes, decision makers on the health system side are not always rational in terms of what they want or what they think they want. So we give them options that are, we think, tenable to both sides. So it's complex. And, if you look at the way that anesthesia is structured in the United States, it's still highly fractured. It's a highly fractured. There are all kinds of hospitals that have insourced that are now outsourcing, or hospitals that have outsourced are now trying to insource. And so that's probably going to be what we see evolve over the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to come back to this idea of kind of leadership integration with hospital systems, because I think that's an area where many CRNAs have not, or they don't really have the institutional experience necessarily. But Adam, you've been on the financial side for the hospital side. correct? You worked for HCA a little bit. Now you're on the private side. Maybe like hospitals, CRNA leaders flip back and forth as well, depending on where they're at in their career. But since you have experience on both, can you just share a little bit on the hospital side of the financial end? What are hospital like? Just tell other CRNA leaders what hospital leaders are looking for, when they're talking about how much they're spending on anesthesia. Is it the same equation? Because for third-party groups, it's what's your subsidy, right? For internal groups, it's probably just payroll.
Mostly agreeing with everything Randy said, it's almost never cheaper for them to insource. Now, some of the larger systems are very successful at negotiating very competitive rates in the marketplace. Smaller systems may not be. There are a couple things here. Number one, being able to accomplish that and sustain it, I think it is the biggest challenge, because there's a dearth of subject matter experts on the facility and system side that actually know how to run an anesthesia practice. And we all talk about every day about the shortage of anesthesia providers. We need to use providers differently in these settings to try to make up some of that difference. If anything, there's an even greater shortage of anesthesia subject matter experts that can facilitate a system bringing something inside. So it's not just to get the rates, design our staffing, hire the providers. It's how to maintain it and sustain it successfully is a huge problem. The other thing that I think is a barrier, and folks are starting to come around, and you see different realizations at different levels, is, the easy button always used to be, let's go get more anesthesia. Right? We need to expand our out of OR operation. We're adding a new cardiothoracic surgeon, and we're going to double our volume. We want to start a new OB service line that requires 24-hour call. The easy button was always go get more anesthesia, and that's not the easy button anymore. So especially for consolidated systems that have a large number of locations in a fairly limited space, alignment of services has to be on their radar, and it isn't always. Meaning, you don't want to start a new cardiac surgery program when your proforma volume, half of your proforma volume accounts for cannibalizing those cardiac surgery patients that you're now sending to a sister facility and keeping them at your facility, right? That's a net loss for them when they're talking about adding a $2.3 million call panel.
Right. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
That's correct. So that hasn't fully been realized yet. And, when systems do employ, and we talk about operating room efficiency, that's where it's kind of all laid bare, right? It's like they own everything now. There's full transparency. There is no negotiation that has to take place when they want to change something. All the information is known by all the people. And what really opens their eyes is how inefficient some places are. We pride ourselves on great data, and almost with our interactions with our clients, we do.
When you say we, do you mean sound?
Yes.
On data? Yeah. Keep going, please.
So great data, and we're really acting like, these are mini consulting engagements in some instances, especially when it comes to changing the service provision in some way. We're frequently getting, hey, we need 14 sites. Well, and we come back with data that says, you're staffed for 12 today, and you're only using over 10, 6% of the time. Okay. We recommend that you don't increase. In fact, there's an opportunity to decrease cost. So again, there are different levels of understanding that, the light bulbs haven't come on everywhere. Some facilities and leaders are more savvy than others, but that's a real big deal in this age of provider shortages and economics that are really flipping everything on its head. And I know we're going to get to that in just a few minutes.
Yeah, indeed. And while we're talking about finance, just Tom, for the chief CRNAs that you're working with currently, or yourself, are you having to deal with some of the financial, it's no surprise we're going to financial pressure, right, given the current environment. But are you having to deal with that, or you and your colleagues?
Absolutely. We have input in what staffing models are, and during the transition, everything was about a staffing model. And to Adam's point, yeah, you might want 17 sites, but here's what you're utilizing, and here's what we can actually staff now with our current workforce. It's constant. It hasn't stopped, and that's kind of what I was saying before, Joe. The transition from working for a large group to now working for the health system. I'm still working for a large group. It's just, there's a little bit of a shift in what the experiences is, what the experience level is, foundation. Do you have the infrastructure? So it's actually been very interesting, and to watch the changes when you know the players over the years. I'm enjoying it very much, and more importantly, my team is enjoying it because I kept a team intact, and now they can see both sides too. It's actually, because I know our overall thing here is also leadership. It's inspiring more people to step up and become leaders because they want to get involved. In fact, very soon, I'm only going to be the chief of one site because I'm promoting one of my graduates who came to work with me and is now going to be the chief of one of the sites. So that's the thing that, I'll leave all the finance, even though unfortunately I know about it, to Adam and to Randy.
Tom, do you mind giving us some insights into your role at Rutgers and how your experiences of running a program of that nature? Just because I think this is an area that's going to grow throughout the country, especially with more schools popping up due to the third year. And just wanted to kind of give people some insights into what that may look like as a new career option.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a big pivot, Andrew, but sure, I can do that. I mean, it's I've been in education for almost 23 years. I've watched it change to, you're trying to get into CRNA school to now you're trying to get into a 3-year doctoral program. It's extremely competitive. I don't know. I think, the guys I'm looking at on the screen are kind of similar in how many years we've been in this. Like, I don't know if I would have gotten in to Columbia if the pool was this big back then. But I didn't go to an interview. I went and chatted with someone for 5 minutes. We run a business, Andrew. So I guess that's my first thing is an anesthesia program is a business. There is pressure to expand constantly. I run a very successful program that continues to expand. And we had 3 clinical sites when we started. I have 25 now. We just keep growing. The doctoral project has been a bear. I will say it, not many of my colleagues will, but it's a bear. But it's something that our association decided that we would convert to. We were one of the first advanced practice nurses to make that as part of entry to practice, a doctoral degree. I have to tell you, the biggest pain point right now is these next generations. That's where I start to sound like an old guy. But the level of expectation is really at a critical point right now.
I think if we're talking about leadership from an equity holder's point of view or owner, right, I think it's probably key to talk about the transition because the difference where I started and where Thomas and Adam and Randy are is, it's very different. And, I think from an institutional level, they're working in institutions that are quite much larger. But when you're starting at leadership and you're working with small facility leaders, that sort of thing, the one thing I can tell you is that if you want to get into that sort of thing, you need to, everyone online will tell you now, count the cost, measure before you do something, get work-life balance. And this is very, very, very bad advice, right? Like if you want to get something off the ground, and it really doesn't matter if it's any service sector thing, right? Whether it's plumbing or anesthesia or a podcast business or whatever, like you've got to be willing to go way, way above and beyond the standard 9 to 5, probably for 3 or 4 or 5 years just to get it off the ground. And I think as, early on, at least, you bear individual financial risk, which is a different equation. And what I'll share here is that you guys will appreciate this. We got real financial people involved when we started making big mistakes, right? When things started costing us a lot of money, then it was like, you know what, we need some expertise that, Randy and Adam were talking about earlier. You need real expertise. People have done it before. And to break it down for everyone who's younger than me, ChatGPT will not save you, right? That will not get you the answers you need, right? You only get 10 years experience by having 10 years experience. So it's a very different leadership phenomenon, I think, at that level. And if you're really lucky, you work with great people who will continue to elevate your leadership, your organization, and ideally the value that you're bringing to hospitals, surgery centers, and like Tom was saying earlier, ultimately the members of your organization, right? Because they're the ones taking care of the human beings, taking care of those patients.
Kind of pass it over to Adam. So, as you all know, I am in the consulting space, going from facility to facility. One of the big things that I always focus on when starting engagements is really educating my audience on the current state of anesthesia, and the imbalance in terms of the supply and the demand. I just wanted to kind of open to the panel your thoughts on if you think there's any improvements that could be coming down the pipeline, and where you think this is heading in the future.
I wish I could say I was confident that any big improvement was coming down the pipeline, but I don't believe there is. Where this lands, I don't know that anybody knows, but I do know that, you know, a lot of payers, certainly government reimbursement doesn't come anywhere close to covering the cost of care. And as we are seeing both with Medicaid expansions of the last decade and an aging population where government portions of the payer mixes at basically every facility are increasing, the entire bucket of revenue that a service line may receive for professional fees generally doesn't cover the cost of care. I can think of only a handful of programs that I've modeled in the last 4 years that were fee-for-service or could remain fee-for-service, and I can count those on one hand and have fingers left. So not a great, you know, situation, and I know it, you know, especially initially, you know, it was shocking, especially to the facilities that end up having to cover that cost. Of course, you know, for some of your CRNA listeners, there are only a few sources of revenue, right? Number one are the payers. Number two are the patients, right? There is always going to be copays, co-insurance, or some portion that's a patient payment due, even with the government payers. And then the third is the facility. And that's it. So the sources of revenue in this equation are very, very simple, which also means that there's only a couple places you can go when the economics get worse. You know, I looked up a couple of statistics for this talk earlier today. I wanted to see, you know, somebody out there I know had calculated what's the inflation adjusted decrease in Medicare reimbursement for medical services for Part B. And I looked it up, 2001 to 2005, inflation adjusted decreasing by 33%. So 2025. So 33% in that 24 years. And even in the last, say, since COVID, so last 4 years or so, we've seen increases in provider compensation up to 50% in some markets. So those two things are just not congruent with each other. And that's why, whereas, you know, when an anesthesia group would go ask the hospital for assistance, where it might be a 30% or a 50% increase, we are seeing exponential increases almost across the board. Hey, our subsidy needs to double. Hey, it needs to go up by 2.5 times. Part of that is, you know, utilization efficiency. Part of that is the expansion of the number of sites of service where anesthesia is required, especially in the out-of-OR space, your cath labs, EP lab, IR, endoscopy, bronchoscopy. You know, there are some facilities that we work with where 50% of the volume that we handle every day comes from an out-of-OR load, and that was just unheard of 10 years ago. So the expansion of anesthesia requirements, the increase in anesthesia compensation, and the decrease in anesthesia reimbursement have all just kind of created this perfect storm of these massively increased requirements for assistance from the facilities. And I don't want to fail to mention, this is hitting the ASC space too in a large way. And I hate to say it, but they're even less prepared to deal with that than the hospitals are, simply because they've absolutely never had to deal with it before, right? An ASC administrator's sole job was to bring volume, any volume, and keep the surgeons happy. And that's it. That's not the case anymore. That doesn't work anymore. Efficiency is paramount. Not all volume is good volume for us, especially. But the flip side of that is good volume for us is great volume for them. So if I had to say, you know, distill that all, especially on the ASC side, but on the hospital side too, don't chase volume, chase margin, right? That's gonna help dig you out of all of these problems. So going to the economics and the effect of the economics and how we tend to handle this with our current clients, prospective clients is how can we be as creative and efficient with our staffing as we can be based on their listed requirements. And sometimes we talk to them about, hey, we really don't think you need a physician here. We can do this with a CRNA and hold back the physician for these 3 sites or whatever that may be. So we really focus on physician and CRNA collaboration, medical direction, right? It's a billing choice. It's an option. And it comes with rules that, when actually properly followed, wildly affect the operational efficiency of any operating room. So we stay away from that. Very often in larger facilities, we're going to model a facility where we might have some sites that are CRNA only, some sites that are physician only, some sites that are a team in ratios that would typically be considered care team, 1 to 4 or less. And then we may have some sites that are in more of a truly leveraged collaborative model where it might be 1 to 5, 1 to 6, 1 to 7, right? So you still have to think about the throughput efficiency in those sites, right? One physician can't be expected to do every single pre-op in a high volume out of OR center that's doing, 16 endos per room per day, something like that. So we'll typically substitute that with float CRNAs that are specifically designed to help with throughput, right? The physician doesn't have to do every pre-op. The physician doesn't have to do every block. The physician doesn't have to sign every single person out of the PACU, right? CRNAs can do that too. And when we have more people qualified and allowed to do more things, there are simply more people available to take care of all of these things at any given point. So being creative in your modeling and being as efficient as you can be, helps take some of the sting out of the terrible economics that we're all facing today. And I think, certainly for all the facility administrators and other executives out there that are hearing this, it doesn't matter who your vendor is or whether you bring it in-house. Everybody is subject to the same labor market. We can't magically create people for less, no more so than anybody else can. Randy and I will go to the same market. We often bid on the same facilities, and we're all basically doing our market assessments and saying, we think we can recruit to this. And it's all very, very, very close. Same thing with No Surprises Act, which, went into effect in, I think, early 2022. That's the other piece on the commercial side that has hurt. Some of the traditional large vendors, legacy vendors, out there had some very, very preferential rates that were kind of legacy rates back from the late 80s and 90s, right? When No Surprises came around, it eliminated a lot of those preferential rates. So really everybody's kind of getting clamped down into the same narrow band of rates. Within reason, there are still some of those preferential rates left out there in certain states. So if everybody's paying the same for labor and everybody's relatively getting reimbursed the same, the value proposition really becomes on service and efficiency.
Yeah. You briefly touched on scope of practice, and, kind of being the business person in the middle of this, the pushback we always get from physicians is that there's like a lack of structure around independent practice. Just wanted to kind of open to the panel and see, ask the question like, is there a set of guidelines for independent practice? Like when could someone be considered independent and working on their own? And why isn't there more subspecialties within the CRNA, like a cardiac route? Tom, I know you're on the education side. Is that something that's in development? Just wondering where that could be heading in the future.
I think when it comes to this idea, there's a lack of structure. I'm not sure where that concern is exactly coming from. But I think there's probably 2 points to make here, and that this word independent is often misunderstood, right? Most people hear independent and they think they're all alone. And what we do in our organization is say, as your level of autonomy increases, right? Whether it's with high acuity cases, working with physicians or working on your own, your responsibility to communicate also increases, right? Which lends to the second point, which is whether, and Adam, you did a great job describing different models there. Take a very similar approach. It was just spot on, right? Because what I think Adam described there was really taking the problem you're trying to solve and put that first, and then working backwards from that. And the problem we're trying to solve is high quality, efficient care. And that can be done in a lot of different ways, right? But the key point is, what is the appropriate clinical oversight for that facility based on the talent and education of the individuals and the culture, the needs of the surgeons and the patients. That's the question to be asking. That's the framework to be deploying. And I think, again, whether it's internal, external, that has to be the modus operandi if you really want to navigate that well. And I can tell you that, look, and most people on this call have been involved in CRNA advocacy, and one on the regulatory side, which is not today's focus. But I can tell you that debate is very different than what should be happening at a clinical level, where you're evaluating the individual skills of individual practitioners. So hopefully that is the structure that we're all seeking to employ. And by the way, the word employ was not a comment on the internal external debate going on, but it's a great question. And I think it's a legitimate question, because I'll just add this last point. There are some groups who use almost experimental models where they're taking, and this really applies to any type of professional, where they're taking people just out of their training and immediately putting them into high responsibility roles just because they have a certain set of letters behind their name. And I think this is generally unwise.
I did want to also come back to the subspecialty. Do you guys see your specialty creating more routes for people to be more focused in terms of care in the future? Cardiac, peds, potentially OB certifications as something that could come down the pipeline?
Not an educator, but my job before this job, I had a lot of conversations with the key stakeholders within the community. This is not exactly where you're going, but it was a flavor of the kind of conversations is, should we actually move the entire educational construct to be nurse practitioner / CRNA? That was a very common question I got. And then there was to what level of specialization makes sense for the community and for the key stakeholders that the community serves. Now, we do have acute pain fellowships and specialization. We do have chronic pain as well. So in terms of specialization, that is about as far as the CRNA community has formally moved. I think there is always a conversation, around if the profession doesn't continue to evolve, it will die. So, I think we should look honestly to what the communities or what the employers and what the communities that have CRNAs, what they're asking for and what they need. And my big pushback on we should radically change the education of CRNAs and include nurse practitioners, like no one's actually asking for that. Like hospitals aren't calling me up, as when I was the CEO of the ANAC. So you know what I need? I need to put a very valuable resource out of the OR to provide clinical service that is significantly less important to me relative to the OR stuff. So I think if we look, I use that same kind of construct. If we look at do we need cardiac specialization? Well, there's a lot of CRNAs who have specialized into cardiac. There are a lot of CRNAs who do OB only. There's a lot of CRNAs who do peds, and we can go on and go on. We haven't, I don't think as a community, and again, I'm probably the last person that should be commenting on this, but we haven't said, you know what we really need is we need to stand up another specialization or specialty or subspecialty, I should say. So who knows where things go, but we're not when we talk to our clients and when we talk to clinicians, I'm not hearing a drumbeat of requests for specialization or subspecialization.
And Andrew, I would just add to that, and yes to everything Randy just said. From the educator perspective and being in it for so long, there was a time that that was the focus of, hey, should we do this? And as Randy said, there's acute, there's chronic pain, there's programs out there. I have CRNAs who've gone through my program and graduated who have specialized, not a formal additional training in the vein of a physician residency where they go off and they do an additional year for cardiac fellowship, et cetera. But they want to focus on that because that's just what they're interested in. Just the last couple of years, I've had 3 CRNAs, 3 graduates who took jobs specifically at institutions where they would be providing probably 80 to 90% of their time spent on pediatrics. 2 have gone to places just because they wanted to do cardiac. OB is kind of a given now in my neck of the woods that you actually are expected to do OB, and some people like it and some people don't. And luckily, in my experience as a leader, I've been blessed to have a great mix of people who, no one's forced to do anything. We don't force anyone to do anything. But as Randy said, no one's knocking at the door saying, hey, can you do this? And that again was on full display during COVID when we were taking over any space that we could call a unit, and we did, and we were running it. So we were the intensivists. There was a point where myself and several of my colleagues were running these units, and we had OR nurses taking care of vents, and we were just managing them. And even after that, no one was saying, hey, can you be an NP too? Because no one's going to pull, again, as Randy said, I'm not getting pulled out of the operating room to do that, unless that was all that there was, which was what was happening in 2020.
So I just want to kind of kick the conversation over to you, John, and kind of get some feedback from your end. I know you are a 25% owner within your group. Can you give us a little insight into how you're partnering with your physicians to grow your organization? I know you guys are a little unique, your group. You guys are focused not only on just providing clinical support, but also other lines of service. I just wanted to kind of get some of your insights into some of the things that you're seeing with your physician partners.
Sure. So in our group, I think our special sauce is the ability to hire really top-notch providers. At the end of the day, all of the criteria to be a good anesthesia group is the same, whether it's insourced, whether it's outsourced to a large managing group or a small managing group. You have to have clinical expertise. You have to have business acumen for, as has been described, a terrible economic venture. And you have to know what the rules are. Where are the lines? And each state has a little bit different set of those for practice. So when you look at the physician side, we do collaborate a good bit with our physicians, and we offer different leadership tracks within the company for those that are interested in it. I think once you start into the leadership realm, the first thing you have to realize is it's no longer about you. It's about everybody else. And as the comments were made earlier, what that entails is you're available and your service is there for whatever time is necessary for and for whatever thing or whatever situation is at the time. And I don't think everybody really appreciates that until you start into it. You know, when you talk about independent practice, our experience is a lot of folks want to be independent. I'm not talking just about CRNAs. I'm talking about physicians as well. A lot of people say they want to be independent or can be independent until they are independent. So it's not necessarily in our group, it's not anesthesiologist versus CRNA. When we hire folks, we hire anesthesiologists and we evaluate anesthesiologists with the same criteria as we do CRNAs. Certainly we have CRNAs that are really good at certain things, and we have anesthesiologists that are really good at certain things. But the spirit within our group is very collaborative. And honestly, the road that we're going down as a profession, I think both groups need to look, and I'm talking about as an organization, the CRNA, the AANA, and the MD, the ASA organization, need to find ways to better collaborate. When you look at, as Adam had talked about earlier, when you look at the economics of what we're dealing with today, it's not getting any better in 5 years or 10 years. I think in certain parts of the country, we are full all the way pretty much down the road to a Medicare for all type mentality. And honestly, it's a little disappointing because there are many physicians and CRNAs that have just kind of given way to it, just kind of accepted that's the way it's going to be. And there's not a whole lot that anybody can do about it. Spending time in DC this January, nobody wanted to really talk about healthcare at all. Not specifically anesthesia. I'm just talking about our system and where our healthcare system is going right now. Anesthesia is like one microcosm of what's happening throughout the entire system. You look at commercial insurance, we've got 4 left, and one of them is trying their best to do everything but commercial insurance. They own practices, they own pharmacies, they own outpatient ASC chains. So where all that goes, you know, as a CRNA organization and a physician organization, if those two could ever come together and look at what's the real issue, to me, one of our biggest issues is our Medicare rate versus our commercial rate is in some states 20%. Look at every other medical specialty out there. What are their rates of Medicare versus commercial? 70, 80, 90. If anesthesia was 50, what kind of difference would that make to everybody's reimbursement? What kind of difference would that make to hospital subsidies or ASC subsidies? And so we're going in the opposite direction of that. And as organizations, I think we're going in different directions as well. So really, when physician anesthesiologists come to our group, it is very well known. We're not a group that beats our chest and says we're anti-anesthesiologists and we are CRNAs, conquerors of the world. That's not our mentality. That's not our culture at all. It's how can you come in and help our group be better. And same thing with CRNAs. So when you talk about certifications, when you talk about CRNA independent practice and how does that work? How do you know if they're ready? Certain facilities that we cover are pretty high comorbidity, pretty big cases, and we're covering it with all CRNAs. There's no anesthesiologists in the house. But when we hire folks, we don't hire anybody with less than 5 years of experience. We don't hire anybody that can't use a fiber optic bronchoscope. We don't hire anybody that does not understand or know how to use an ultrasound machine. So I think you have to have certain levels of criteria depending on the acuteness of the facility that you're at. And when a facility calls or we approach a facility, we try to be, as Adam and Randy said earlier, we're the same way. We try to be as flexible as we can. It doesn't matter to me as the CEO of our organization and one of the partners, how we cover it. Because I know we're going to hire the right people to cover it. If they want all MDs, like out in the West, that's fine. We can do that. If they want all CRNAs or whatever in between, the criteria for good service doesn't change. How we measure if we're doing well or not doesn't change. Whether it's a CRNA doing the fiber optic or it's the anesthesiologist doing the fiber optic, success needs to happen. And so when we have a new provider come in, they are checked off. We do certain things and they're followed and make sure everything is up to the standard of the practice, which I think is very important. And that just having that criteria with the facility, I think makes everybody a lot more comfortable with the idea of having CRNAs and physicians practicing at the same time, not necessarily just physicians doing pre-ops, but physicians doing cases, doing breaks, running flip rooms, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, for us to really take the next step as a profession, one of the hardest things I think we're gonna find in the coming years, maybe I'm getting ahead of the discussion, is the anesthesiologist shortage that is now starting to begin.
Yep. And maybe that's a good time to pivot into the future of anesthesia. I know, Joe, you had some thoughts on this. I just want to go ahead and kick it over to you as well.
We've certainly alluded to it during the conversation already. I appreciate everybody's comments. I think, I think about this in two ways, and maybe it's the concept is easy, the application is hard, right? And I think the concept is, rather than living in a world, or I'm going to use the cliche, living in a world of either or, right? I think anesthesia as a specialty increasingly needs to think of both and, right? Or best of both. And giving Adam credit for really articulately describing models that really advocate for the full utilization of those professionals, whatever that looks like at a local level. I think increasingly that has to be the question we are answering. How do we get the most possible value out of those professionals for those patients? And when we come in with that mindset, the answers should get different, right, over time. I don't think it's wise for us as an industry to keep saying, we're going to do things the way we did them in 1965, and we're going to hope for a different result. Maybe, but it seems unwise to me. And I think the other half of it, to not make my answer go too long, is that there's this, very negative cultural thing that's been going on in anesthesia. As I think for those of us who have experience outside of anesthesia as well, it's all a bit weird, right? That there's so much interprofessional tension in this business. But figuring out how to undo that and disengage that tension and begin to not be focused on who can grab the pie, right? But be focused on how do we create value for that hospital, for that surgery center, for that surgeon, and ultimately for that patient. Having those cultural conversations, that's the really, really hard part. And I think firms, whether they're private service firms or internal lines, people who do that well are going to be well positioned for the future to navigate the very difficult economic landscape that everyone has described. That's how both in concept and in application, I think it's the diplomacy, the cultural aspect that's really hard for the future.
I'll add a little bit onto that, Joe. I've kind of always said that the politics of our business, the negative politics of our business, are filtered down and have become so ubiquitous that they truly negatively affect operational efficiency wherever they are pervasive. I've worked in some great team environments where, hey, the CRNAs break the physicians break the CRNAs, everybody teaches, everybody blocks, everybody discusses difficult cases together and tries to learn together from them. Not forgetting that everybody has something that you can learn something from everybody. Being able to drop the politics, keep that out of your practice, create a truly collaborative environment where everybody learns from and helps everyone else, that is the ideal goal. And I think, John talked about it. Joe, I think you talked about it. Randy, I think we all kind of hinted to this. We want to create places that people want to work. And that ideal state is, what people want to work in. And frankly, if you have a bad apple, that bad apple needs to go, because they are going to disrupt the achievement of that ideal state. Of course, it's not perfect everywhere. It's probably not perfect anywhere, but trying to get there is the key. And again, going into a new facility, check your politics at the door. We're going to do this together. And we've actually frequently, especially starting up a new practice location, we frequently go through a weed out process where we, ask the disruptors politely to exit, even in this recruiting market, because there's just way more damage done by keeping them to avoid that one additional temporary locums provider rather than cutting ties and trying to put your ideal team in place as soon as you can anyway.
Andrew, I want to add on because yes, what Joe and what Adam just added to, I just want to kind of give you a little bubble here. I now work for a huge health system. Every site pays exactly the same amount of money. We get the same benefits. Everything is the same. It is all about the culture. It's all about the culture. And everything else, I can't even say that it's secondary. It's way down the line. You have to build a culture where people want to come to work, as I said earlier, that want to give their best and go home with a sense of satisfaction. We all know that we're going home with a paycheck. That part is a given. But we need to have an environment where everyone gets along. And I'm not talking about strumming a guitar, but we all have to have mutual respect. We all want to have a feeling that we made a difference. I think that's one of the main reasons people get into any healthcare profession. And I will say that, the sites that have a great culture, they're the first ones to fill up with providers. And I'm very lucky to work in a place where I have no openings. I have no CRNA or physician openings. It's a huge, huge edge that we're trying to replicate in other places. So
I think I agree with all of that. The one thing that I see pretty clearly that isn't always articulated clearly is if you look at people or organizations or teams that are doing well, the thing that is almost always there, without exception, is long-term orientation. And that's really hard to be long-term oriented, especially in our environment, where, And my job is probably 60% putting out fires and 40% being strategic. And that's election. Like, I'm fortunate to have that. A lot of my senior level leaders are, probably in this, 80% to 90% putting out fires. And so I think as we look at, and I think the reason I bring that up in the context of the previous comments is that what you're talking about culture, and culture is built over time by great leadership. And great leadership is built over time and often requires a lot of short-term discomfort. So to Adam's point, you go into a site, you want to turn a site around, the first condition that has to exist in order for you to be successful is you have to have solid frontline leaders at that site. If you don't, you're dead. You're going to be having locum tenens there until the cows come home. And so as we think about what it means to be successful, what competitive advantage really is, it is long-term orientation with a strong orientation towards leadership performance at the site level. Once you get that sorted out, excuse me, most things fall into place. Now, it may take a year. It may take a year and a half, and which is why a lot of sites don't do it, because they don't want to experience the short-term discomfort of doing the hard thing.
My overarching goal when I asked Joe to kind of help with this was to kind of put in front of physicians, because I see it a lot of the time where they're leading the practice, that there are equals from an operational perspective on the CRNA side that have the best interest of the community involved. And I think you guys have done a great job of articulating that. So I just want to thank you guys for joining and giving your insights. And I appreciate your time.